What have you done to my daughter?" The man's roar shook the crowded square. Heads turned, gasps rippled like waves through the marketplace. In the center of it all stood a ragged girl with tangled hair, her thin hands wrapped around a filthy bottle. Beside her, trembling yet calm, was Eleanor, a 7-year-old child with wide brown eyes, Richard's only daughter, his only heir, and she had just drunk from the bottle. The father's face was red with fury, his veins standing out against his neck. His fists clenched, his guards fought to push through the thick wall of onlookers, all pressing in to see the spectacle. "She poisoned her," someone shouted from the crowd. "No, it's a miracle," another voice cried. "It's witchcraft. It's hope. Chaos. Pure chaos." And then it happened. The little girl's lips parted. Her small voice, fragile, broken, but real, pierced the silence that had ruled her life since birth. "Papa." One word, just one, but it struck the man like a lightning bolt. His knees buckled, his mouth fell open, the entire square froze, as if the world itself had stopped to listen. For 7 years, Eleanor had been silent. Doctors had declared her mute. Therapists had tried and failed. Millions had been poured into specialists, experts, machines, and prayers. Nothing had ever worked. Yet here she was, speaking. The bottle slipped from the homeless girl's trembling fingers and shattered against the stones. But to understand this moment, this impossible miracle, we must step back, because stories like these never begin in the center of a square. They begin in the quiet places of despair, where pride and pain battle for control of a man's heart. Richard Morgan was a man of wealth, a man of power. He had built an empire of steel, glass, and oil. He was the kind of man people stood aside for, the kind whose name carried weight in boardrooms and political halls. But even the richest man cannot buy a child's voice. Eleanor was his only daughter. His wife had passed years ago, leaving him with nothing but the fragile girl who carried her mother's eyes. When Eleanor was born, Richard had dreamed of a legacy, of a daughter who would stand beside him, laugh with him, call him father. But as the years passed, she never spoke. Not a word, not a sound. Doctors told him her vocal cords were underdeveloped. Others said it was neurological. Some whispered of curses. Richard spent money like water, flying specialists from every corner of the globe. Therapists visited their mansion weekly. Machines filled entire rooms. Still silence. Every birthday, every Christmas, every quiet dinner, the silence grew heavier. Richard loved his daughter, but deep inside him a seed of frustration took root. What good was all his wealth if he couldn't hear her voice? He never said it aloud, but pride turned his grief into anger. And Eleanor, sweet Eleanor, she felt it. She saw the sadness in her father's eyes, the tension in his jaw. She began to shrink inward, finding comfort only in books, drawings, and the garden her mother had once tended. It was in that garden, behind the tall iron gates of their mansion, that Eleanor first saw Almira. Almira was no stranger to hunger, no stranger to cold. She was the kind of child the world forgets, skin stretched thin over bones, hair wild, eyes both sharp and weary. She lived in the alleys, slept under broken arches, survived on scraps and pity. Her grandmother had raised her in those streets, and though they had little, the old woman carried stories, stories of herbs, of remedies, of miracles whispered from one generation to the next. Almira grew up with those tales. She believed them, because hope was all she had. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. Sometimes, child, what the world throws away carries more power than gold. When her grandmother passed, Almira was left alone, but she carried one thing with her, a little bottle filled with a strange mixture, herbs, roots, a secret recipe. Her grandmother had pressed it into her hand with trembling fingers. Someday, she had whispered, this will help someone. You'll know when. Almira kept it, not because she truly believed, but because it was the last piece of her grandmother she had. And then one afternoon, while wandering past the gates of the rich man's garden, she saw Eleanor, a girl her own age, but dressed in silk, clean, safe, silent. Their eyes met through the iron bars. Neither spoke, because Eleanor couldn't and Almira didn't know how to begin. But sometimes friendship doesn't need words. Day after day, Almira lingered near the gates. Sometimes Eleanor would leave food for her. Sometimes she'd draw pictures on scraps of paper and pass them through. And slowly, two lonely children from two different worlds became something like friends. It was during those secret meetings that Almira learned the truth. Eleanor had never spoken a word, and it was then that she remembered the bottle, which is how the two girls ended up in the square that day. Richard had brought Eleanor to the bustling market, hoping to distract her with colors and noise. He walked proudly, guards at his side, his daughter's hand in his. But in the crush of the crowd, Eleanor slipped away. She found Almira, and Almira, trembling with both fear and hope, pressed the little bottle into her hands. Drink it, she whispered. Please, it might help. The crowd saw. Whispers spread. A beggar girl handing filth to the daughter of a king. And then, before anyone could stop her, Eleanor lifted the bottle to her lips. Now we return to the square, where the world had just stopped at a single word. Pauper. Richard's eyes burned with disbelief. His body shook. For a moment, he thought it was a cruel trick, some ventriloquist hidden in the crowd. But no, he had felt it, seen it. The word came from his daughter's lips. The crowd erupted. Some cheered, some cursed, some fell to their knees in prayer. But Richard turned his fury on the ragged girl who stood trembling before him. You. His voice was low, dangerous. What have you done? Almira's knees shook, but she lifted her chin. I only wanted to help. Help, Richard thundered. You poisoned her. You dared to touch her. The guards reached for her, but Eleanor threw herself between them, clutching Almira's hand. For the first time in her life, she spoke again. No, the word was faint, but it rang louder than any shout. Richard staggered. His own daughter, protecting a beggar. The crowd watched, silent now, breath held. Almira's voice trembled, but her eyes did not. You don't understand, sir. I know what it feels like. To be voiceless. To be unseen. I only gave her what my grandmother gave me. Nothing more. Richard stared at her bare feet, her hollow cheeks, her defiance, and something inside him, something buried under years of wealth and pride, began to crack. He looked at his daughter, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching the homeless girl's hand as if it were life itself. And for the first time in years, Richard Morgan dropped to his knees. That night, the story spread across the city. Some called it a miracle, others called it madness. But one truth stood unshaken. A mute girl had spoken, and a forgotten child had been her savior. In the days that followed, Richard searched for Almira. He found her shivering under the same broken arch where her grandmother had once told her stories. He did not come with guards this time. He came alone. When Almira saw him, she froze, expecting anger. But instead, Richard knelt. You gave my daughter her voice, he said, and now I must give you yours. From that day forward, Almira was no longer forgotten. She was given a home, an education, a future. And Eleanor, the sweet Eleanor, spoke every day, her voice growing stronger, her laughter filling the halls of the mansion that had once been so silent. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, Richard would watch the two girls together, one born into wealth, one into poverty, bound by a miracle. and he would whisper a prayer of thanks not for the money he had spent, nor the power he held, but for the gift he had almost overlooked, the gift of compassion, carried in the hands of a homeless girl. So I ask you, what do you think? Was it fate? Was it faith? Or was it the simple power of kindness? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every one of them. And if this story touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell, because more powerful tales are on the way. Because sometimes the most unforgettable miracles come from the people the world forgets.